Another question that I want to definitely get to is the question about a child who is behind or not on grade level. A lot of parents really struggle with, well, do I have to get them caught up? Or how do I assign credits for a class that a child isn't really doing at the grade level that their, I guess, typical learner would do? And,
right.
And so how do you handle that question?
Well, I'll chime in and say my thoughts on that, and I'd love to hear, your opinions as well, because you've walked it and you've been doing this for a long time too. So we'll just bat these back and forth. But, one thing is that you don't have to think of, oh, well, my child is quote unquote behind, or they're not. Mm-hmm. Okay, so oftentimes parents, obviously we know if our child is not functioning at their chronological age or grade level, maybe where they quote unquote should be. But the most important thing is to meet them where they are developmentally. And
mm-hmm.
And again, it's a paradigm shift. I mean, when I was teaching in public school, obviously you had to keep going, and you just keep chugging children along or passing them along, and that gap just got wider and wider and wider. Well, what we're seeing with children with special needs is they're actually outperforming. They're doing better than their public school peers. Now, why is that? Because you as the homeschooling parent are actually meeting them where they are developmentally, and you're teaching right there in that what's called the zone of proximal development. You're meeting them, you're coming alongside of them and mentoring them and coaching them, and you're just continuing to lift the level because you're meeting them where they are. So I think that we need to free ourselves up from that idea of, well, they're behind, so I can't give them credit. Well, you give them credit for the work they've done. And the other thing I'll always tell parents is, in public school classrooms across the nation, students are given a high school diploma and they're given credit for classes all the time, and they aren't on grade level. They'll graduate. Of course, if a student has an intellectual disability, if they can only do 5th grade skill work in math, then I'm not going to expect them to do geometry and calculus and trigonometry. I'm going to meet that student where he or she is and teach them the skills that they can do. And hopefully I just keep moving them along a continuum of things that are within their grasp, if that makes sense, if that's helpful. So you give them credit, you log the time, you keep record of your materials that you're using. And we tell families, if they have done 120 hours or more in a subject and they've met the requirements that you've set forth for that class, mm-hmm. be that, for one student, that may be this student is able to write 4 papers for this English class. But for another student, it might be this student is going to do 3 retellings or an oral presentation or a PowerPoint. So you set forth the requirements for the class, and once they've met your requirements and they've done 120 hours or more, or they've completed about 70-75% of a book or a group of materials that you've put together, then you give them the credit. You document what they've done and you give them the credit for that class.
Right.
So do you have thoughts on that you'd like to share? Or?
Well, that's similar to what we did. I found that some of the subjects it's easier to grade just because, they're multiple choice or whatever, but for my one son that did things in a more fluid manner, definitely putting together rubrics ahead mm-hmm. of time to let him know too how he was going to be graded, whether it was, I'm grading you on the amount of time you put into this, the attention that you give it, how hard you actually work on it. Mm-hmm. And so then they have expectations of what they're going to be graded on too. And it's easier for me to grade and not be as biased either when it comes to the end. And then I know for sure when I do give that grade on the transcript, it was the one that was deserved. And
yes. Absolutely. I love rubrics and checklists, and I think that's a fantastic way, particularly for kiddos who are struggling, that more authentic assessment. Rubrics and checklists are great. If folks watching don't know I don't want to assume anything. A rubric is just a rating scale. Typically, it's a 1 to a 5. 1 being the worst grade they can get, 5 being the best, but you set forth the criteria if you want to earn a score, for instance, for an oral presentation or a book report, then you set forth the criteria. If you do these things, you're going to earn this score. If you do these things, you'll earn. If you want to earn the best score, then you need to make sure your project or your paper has X, Y, and Z, and you give them the rubric and the expectations up front, and they set a goal.
Yeah, so there's no guesswork, and a lot of times for a child who struggles, that extra anxiety that is, well, am I going to do okay or not? Well, they'll know pretty much ahead of time whether they're going to do good or not by how much they've invested in it, and they've made sure that they've got all those check boxes ready to be checked. So,
yes. Yeah. That's a great tool for students for sure.
But yeah, and then giving credit. You can give credit for things that you don't consider school too, but that are learning. Because think about it, in high school, they take shop classes, they do child development. You have to think outside the box when it comes to classes in high school too. Like, we had talked previously about what their bent is. And that can be on their transcript too.
Right. So I'll piggyback on that and just share with folks, maybe this will help somebody and encourage somebody. But my daughter loves horseback riding. And so we wanted to line up some volunteer work experience for her. And she's very motivated. She's not a real motivated reader, but if I find things that are horse related or I find things that tie in with her love of animals, then she's more motivated, and motivation and interest is half the battle. So we actually gave her credit last year, and she'll get partial credit this year for equine studies. She volunteers at a therapeutic riding center for kids that have special needs, and then she also works at a little farm helping with pony parties and feeding horses and grooming, and then I gave her some other things that she had to read and some projects to do, but we're pulling those experiences as well as the materials together for a half a credit for equine studies. So it's an elective. So tap into your kids' strengths and passions for sure.
Well, and two, they look forward to that class. So they're more likely to get through the stuff they don't want to do so that they can do that.
Exactly. That's a good motivator.
Use it as a motivator. You can use school as a motivator. So yeah.